Hey everybody, I've been doing a couple Cat Stevens things on the channel, and several people asked me what I thought of this album, which I've often said is, I think, his best album, Catch Bullet 4. I'm going to do a little review of the album. I hope you'll consider watching. Well, I did a review of Cat Stevens records. I'm going to put this down. I did a review of Cat Stevens records like a year ago. It was one of the first things I ever did. I have all his vinyl records, and I've been listening to him since 7th grade. And I put down Cat Stevens' Catch Bullet 4 as his best album. I guess if you ask me on any given day, I don't know, he's got a lot of good albums. I'll tell you, Boot in the Chocolate Box, I think often doesn't get quite as much attention as it deserves. That's a fantastic album. It's got some of his very best songs on it. There are a couple I didn't listen to quite as much maybe on that one, but that's another good one. And of course, you've got Teaser and the Fire Cat and Tea for the Tiller Man and among his other albums. But I've always thought Catch Bullet 4 was just pound for pound one of his best albums. It's got some of his best songwriting on it, some of his best performances, and I think it's a perfect balance of, kind of the acoustic Cat Stevens, but it's got good rhythm to it, and it's got a little bit of a rockier edge. And it's just an excellent album. It's sort of got a concept to it. I just think it's maybe his best album. I mean, all those albums are good, but I still think it's maybe his best album. So I was going to make a couple comments on Catch Bullet 4. I've got my little notes here on an envelope. The album came out in 1972, and that was a follow-up to Teaser and the Fire Cat. And I still remember the first time I heard Sitting. We used to listen to albums in junior high. Maybe if you ever watch any, I've talked about that a couple different times. A couple albums, I remember hearing Uriah Heep live in those little record listening sessions we'd have before band. I remember hearing Led Zeppelin 4, George Carlin, Cheech and Chong. That was a pretty crazy time. But one of the albums I remember, a guy brought in his sister's Catch Bullet 4, and I just still remember hearing Sitting with that piano kind of intro, and that's the first song on the album, and it always caught my attention. And I think I'd bought that album by probably early 74, and I still have my copy. In fact, I've picked up a couple others over the years, but I still have the copy I bought back in 74. Super duper good album. And that album came out in 1972. It was a follow-up to Teaser and the Fire Cat. And one of the things I kind of wanted to say is I think it's kind of a Goldilocks album, I guess, in a sense that Goldilocks was neither too hot nor too cold. I mean, that's sort of the golden mean, Goldilocks. And it was a perfect blend because he came off those 3 super duper good acoustic albums that were just really acoustic guitar albums, Mona Bones Jacone, Tea for the Tiller Man, and Teaser and the Fire Cat. And then, of course, he had his earlier pop career. But those 3 albums kind of, I think, cemented him in the popular mind as sort of an acoustic guitarist, and that was the age of acoustic guitar players, really, because that was John Denver and James Taylor. I guess Jim Croce was, doing so much good stuff right around that time. And but in later albums, he would, kind of go into a little bit rockier. He was never rock, but he did do things with electronic music. He started incorporating more electronic stuff into some of his albums, even starting with his next album after Catch Bullet 4, Foreigner, and more rhythm. Some of those rhythms kind of went back to his R&B roots, really, which is cool. But I always thought on Catch Bullet 4, he had a perfect mix. It was a little rockier. It had I think it had more drums and more rhythm to it, and it was more like, it sounded more like a band album. Some of those earlier albums, which I love, a lot of those songs were really just a couple acoustic guitars and maybe really sparse instrumentation beyond him and Alan Davies playing away, which was so nice. Nothing wrong with that. That was great. But on Catch Bullet 4, he brought in an organ player, Jean Roussel, and there's drums on a lot of it. And it sounds like a band playing, but it's still acoustic. And one of the cool things about it is he's using more keyboards. Now, he had keyboards on all his albums, I think I See the Lights, a piano song. He had Sad Lisa, of course, Morning is Broken, which was Rick Wakeman. But, he always had good piano. But he brought in an organ player, and he played quite a bit of piano on Catch Bullet 4, but it was not keyboards. It was piano and organ, and that's kind of old school music. It was still, so piano and organ are kind of acoustic. I'll call it the organ an acoustic instrument. I mean, it's not a computer. It's a sort of an acoustic instrument, or kind of fits in with old school instrumentation, a piano and an organ. So it was just a really good album. And it, like I said, I think it was a perfect mix. It was rockier a little bit, but it also had all the acoustic sensibilities still. I think that some might say lost, like Foreigner, and even Buddha in the Chocolate Box. As much as I love it, it doesn't have that sort of acoustic guitar album feel. And Catch Bullet 4 still has that kind of acoustic music feel, but it's also got a little bit of more of a rock band feel to it. It's not a rock band album, but it's got a little bit more of that in it. The other thing is that's kind of interesting. He went into Eastern mysticism, a little bit with this, and of course, several years later, he would convert to Islam. But Catch Bullet 4, that's from the 10 bulls of enlightenment on the path to enlightenment, and the fourth bull is you catch the bull. I don't know if that's the expression, catch the bull by the horns, but the bull represents meditation and enlightenment. And so you're on the path to enlightenment, and the fourth step is catching the bull. And so it did have an Eastern mystic quality to it. And of course, Eastern mysticism was kind of around back then. I associate that I don't know if we use that term Eastern mysticism as much anymore, but I kind of associate that with Hinduism and Buddhism, somewhat more than Islam, which is what he ended up converting to. I thought that was kind of interesting. But when George Harrison, a lot of those people would, they're kind of Western background people, but that kind of went into Eastern mysticism. My dad was even kind of into that for a little while back then in that period. He had long sideburns, but it was usually Buddhism or Hinduism. And I don't know if Cat Stevens was really being that particular, or I guess we might say denominational or doctrinal, but it is that Catch Bullet 4 is a kind of Buddhist concept and term. And he's also got that song on there, The Boy with the Moon and Star in His Head, which is such a pretty song. But that is has a really kind of overt spirituality. It even has like almost like a Messiah figure. That little, if you know that song, that little baby is born after he makes love with this mysterious woman, and this little boy is born with the moon and star on his head, which some might say is a symbol of Islam, but I kind of don't think so. Maybe, I don't know if Cat Stevens, what he would say, it's his song, but that's sort of an old nature symbol, but it's definitely a kind of religious symbol of nature and the great beyond, and the cosmos beyond us all, and the moon and the star, and the little boy at the end. It becomes like a little prophet as he grew older, and he says, "Love is all I know," which is the simple truth of, most great religions have a simple truth, love. But that had a kind of Eastern mystical quality to it. Also, if we still use that term, I feel like we don't use that term as much, but I grew up hearing about Eastern mysticism, which I guess is kind of a Western-centric concept if you think about it. But nonetheless, the other thing I would say is it's his most countercultural album. and the 72, that was the heyday of the counterculture, more than really even the late 60s or the mid 70s, the early 70s. And I was young, but I do remember that my school was full of stuff that I can't imagine they would let kids get away with today. And people had long hair, and there was an openness about a lot of things today we'd probably be appalled at some of the. And I feel like this is a pretty countercultural album. It's also album-oriented rock radio album. It's kind of interesting. One of the criticisms of it is it didn't really have a hit on it. The Sitting was kind of a hit, but I'm old enough to remember album-oriented rock radio, which would be what I would listen to. It was one of the first FM radio stations I ever listened to was WRIF. And in the early 70s, FM rock wasn't really commercial yet. It had become commercial by the later 70s. But some of those FM stations early on, they barely played any commercials. You might hear a commercial for Joe's Head Shop, or people reading poetry, or there's a poetry reading at the library or something. But it was not commercial. It was not corporate. That was awesome. And it was not, there were no lawyers or corporations involved in a lot of that music. If they were very behind the scenes. And it was a very countercultural time. And I feel like this is his most countercultural album. I mean, even kind of the dress, that picture of him on the back, that's definitely kind of a countercultural hippie figure. He smoked a lot of cigarettes in that period, that kind of thing. But one interesting thing is there wasn't necessarily a big hit on the album. But, when people say that, I'm old enough to remember he never had, I wouldn't say he was ever on AM radio a ton. He was always kind of FM album-oriented rock, in my opinion. Now, like Morning is Broken, that was a huge hit. And maybe Peace Train and Wild World. But a lot of all his fans were listening to those as albums. And FM rock, they would play a lot of those Cat Stevens songs on the radio on FM, right in there with Deep Purple and Led Zeppelin and other bands of the time. So he was an FM radio album-oriented rock figure. And I feel like that album was in the sweet spot of that period of radio, which was a great period of radio. That is the period when a lot of classic rock was at its height, because I think there was a freedom for great musicians to kind of experiment and do things in that period before a lot of corporations kind of took everything over, both the record companies and radio. It's an album oriented recording. It's not necessarily supposed to be an album with a bunch of hits. Sitting, I guess you could say, was kind of a hit, but I was listening to the radio back then. I don't remember that being on like AM radio much, maybe a little bit. Yeah, sure, some, but not a lot. Those were FM songs, as were most of his songs. You would hear Cat Stevens more on album-oriented rock radio, I think, than AM radio. I think pound for pound, it's got some of the best songwriting he ever did. Like I said, I think he's got great song. All his albums always are consistently good songwriting. I mean, really. Buddha in the Chocolate Box, like I said, I don't think that gets as much attention as it deserves. But there are a couple on there I didn't listen to quite as much. But this, I think, just every song is just a stellar song. It starts out with Sitting, then The Boy with the Moon and Star in His Head. And Angel Sea, I've got my acoustic guitar here. Angel Sea is that... and that's great. That's rock. That's rock. And it's also kind of got that hippie mysticism to it. I don't know. Angel Sea, I always pictured that being some sort of Celtic goddess or sort of feminine force of nature or something, a divine sacred that was kind of the earth and, coming from the sea. And it sounded also kind of Celtic-y or British too, but just great. And one of my favorite songs is Silent Sunlight. And, I got my old high school English book out, which was never returned. You might notice it's not returned. I was supposed to return it in 1978. Oops. I guess we'll let sleeping dogs lie. But I had written the words to Silent Sunlight in there. Because that's such a good song. And I would have been about 15 or 16 at the time. But that's really good song. Can't Keep It In. Can't Keep It In was included on Cat Stevens' greatest hits, but like I said, one of the advantages of getting older, I don't remember that really being a hit. Like, I'm a Believer or I Want to Hold Your Hand or something was a hit, or or even Smoke on the Water was a hit. I don't remember but that was included on Cat Stevens' greatest hits. But that's another kind of it's acoustic guitar, but it's got that kind of Cat Stevens R&B feel to it. And a couple that I think are standouts when you get on side two, he's got that song called 18th Avenue, and I just think that's one of the best songs he ever did. 18th Avenue, sometimes called the Kansas City Nightmare, and that's got I think it's, what does it say on here? Does he have I was going to say a Fender Rhodes, but that one has. It's got an organ, but there's like an electric piano on that, which I'm assuming is some kind of Fender Rhodes or something like that, or one of those early, which is different than the keyboards and the synthesizers that came out like in the later 70s. But it's a super duper good song. It's rocky in the middle. It's got that really good instrumental. And the lyrics are kind of impressionistic, almost hallucinogenic. I rode a while for a mile or so down the road to the 18th Avenue, and it's a dream, and it's got a dreamlike quality. And the people I saw were other people I knew, and they all came out to take a view. The path was dark and borderless down the road to the 18th Avenue. What a great song. And then Freezing Steel, which sort of, now that had an electric guitar on it, and that might be one of the rockier songs he ever did. It's kind of got an rock electric guitar. If there was any electric guitar on Monopone, Jacone, Teaser, and the Firecat or T for the Tiller, man, I'll stand corrected. I don't think there was. Now, he might have had some kind of 60s pop electric guitar on his pop stuff, like Matthew and Son and New Masters, but I'm almost not even counting that. But Freezing Steel, that's got electric guitar on it, and it's like a rock guitar part. One thing you never hear on any Cat Stevens is like much lead guitar, like electric lead guitar. You have like nice leads in like Father and Son and Alan Davies, but you don't really hear like, lead guitar, even tasteful lead guitar. Even the Carpenters had a lead guitar solo around that time in Goodbye to Love, which was kind of shocking to people at the time, but it was kind of a fuzz-based, haunting guitar solo. I don't think he's got a nice guitar solo on "Child for a Day," which is on "Is It So." That's one of the only actual guitar solos I think I've ever heard of that sort of a traditional guitar solo. But Freezing Steel is a really good one. He's got a Latin song on there, "O Caritas." Nos morituri salutamos, those of us who are ready to die, we salute you, from the old Roman pledge. But great song. It's got that super duper good solo piano song, Sweet Scarlet, which is kind of like Sad Lisa off T for the Tiller, man. But it's just, and like I said, I think that's the old countercultural Cat Stevens, maybe that he tried to get away from. But I just picture him sitting there with a cigarette and a glass of wine on the piano. Not much light, maybe in some dark studio or in some bar after everything closed down, and him just playing that Sweet Scarlet, so beautiful. Really great song. And then you've got Ruins at the end, and I want to say one thing about Ruins, because it's so quiet in the ruins, walking through the old. You get two key of D songs on Catch Bullet 4, and I would say a key of D song. Cat Steve, the key of D for acoustic guitars is a great guitar key anyway. But John Denver, Jim Croce, James Taylor, they played a lot of stuff in D because you can. And Cat Stevens too. Like just a lot of that good acoustic music of the early '70s would feature the D chord and all the different little suspensions and open overtones you can get with the D chord. And he's got so like Moon Shadow is a D chord. The Wind. I'm on the bad angle. Or what about, well, I think it's fine, hills and jumbo plains. Those are all D. To me, that's a signature component of '70s music, the D chord on an acoustic guitar. But on Catch Bullet 4, you get two good D songs. You get "Boy with the Moon and the Star in His Head," acoustic, not just songs in the key of D. That's one thing, but I'm talking about acoustic guitar D chord songs, and there's a difference. Not just the key of D generically, but acoustic guitar D. And the other one is "Ruins." So quiet in the ruins, walking through the old town. And I'll just finish with this story. I was in a place in Sicily about 25 years ago, might have even been 30 years ago, and I think it was called Selenite. And these Greek temples had collapsed in the Middle Ages, and huge temples, and there were a bunch of them in this big valley. But they had collapsed in an earthquake in the Middle Ages, all in one day, I guess, one earthquake. And so you go through this valley and you'd see hunks of these temples, just huge, blocks half as big as this room, just all over ruins. And also when I was in Pompeii, and I hadn't really listened to the song in a long time. I would probably be like 34, 35 at the time, and I hadn't been listening to Cat Stevens that much, but I was going through these old ruins and I started thinking, it's so quiet in the ruins, walking through the old town. I just started thinking about that and the passage of time and the destruction of nature, and in some cases, the destruction caused by us, people against people. But, and the poignancy of that great final song on Catch Bullet 4 struck me again. Just such a good album. And like I said, I think pound for pound, it's got this string of the most consistently excellent songs on any of his albums. And that's saying a lot because every album he did is always consistently good and is full of good songs. But I mean, just every song is top tier Cat Stevens songwriting. And I don't think it was ever one of his hits. I guess you could say "Sitting" was a hit, but it was album-oriented rock, and it's just, the album in its entirety is just a masterpiece. And it's like a lot of the music of the early '70s that was designed for FM. It's meant to be heard as an album. And even the concept, the spirituality, the kind of mysticism of the concept, it's meant to be heard as an album. And I think he kept doing that. I think Foreigner was definitely like that, and Numbers. But I think by the time Numbers came out, that it was meant to be heard as an album. But radio was changing a little bit in the music business. But this was the sweet spot. It's just a super duper good album. And so I love every one of his albums. I think a lot of people always would say "Two for the Tillerman" was his best album, and it's no doubt one of the great albums of acoustic folk music. And I think "Teaser and the Firecat's a terrific album. Mona Bone Jacone is a really good album. But I think pound for pound, it just had all the stars were in place, if you'll forgive the illusion, all the astrological illusion, but all the stars were in place, the time, his growth as a songwriter, the band, the radio formats of the time that were so open and allowed for someone to do something so creative. And it wasn't really supposed to be like I mean, if he wanted a bunch of AM hits, he had those with, New Masters and Matthew and Son. It was an album, and it's just a really good one, a product of the very cool counterculture of the early '70s. It's got excellent musicianship on it. Some of the best lyrics. These lyrics, he always had the lyrics included in his albums, but those lyrics are when I said I wrote "Silent Sunlight," I was just some dumb kid of 15, but I wrote those lyrics to "Silent Sunlight" in my English lit book. And I still think that they hold up with any English literature. It's just really good lyrics, great songwriting, great creativity, intellectual thought behind what he was trying to do. And it's got the feel and the mood of great music, and great music always has a feel and a mood, whether it's, "I love you, baby, yeah, yeah, yeah," or something really profound. And it's got the mood of, every song is just a gem. Great album. Can't and as I talk, I'm just convincing myself I do think it's his best album. And he's got some good ones. Like I said, I think Buddha in the Chocolate Box doesn't get enough attention. That's a great album. It's got some of his best songs on it anyway, I would say. But this one is just right down the line, a great album. And it's also shows his growth. You know, it shows his growth, and it was of a great time too. You know, FM radio was never quite the same by 74, 75 even. So it was a product of a great period in music, the early 70s, not even the mid 70s, the early 70s. Thanks. God bless you. I'm doing this on December 17th, 18th. So have a Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays. What's your preference? But definitely Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays to you and yours. Great album. And I'm going to talk more about Cat Stevens because I think so much of his music. But that Catch Bullet 4 is one of his very best. Thanks. God bless.